Chapter 292 An Astonishing Rainbow Crossing 100 meters. Xiao Hing Chen didn't take the second fight because of Wang Dong's words. The next person to fight was a stocky and muscular youth, who looked like a square box when he stepped on stage. His torso very wide, but he was only about a meter and 60 centimeters tall. His thick arms were bigger than some people's thighs, and his short and needle-like hair complemented his intrepid aura, while his eyes seemed like they were burning with flames. His feet made plonking noises on the ground with every step that he took. Judge. Wang Dong spoke up right at this moment. What? The judge replied with an enraged look on his face. His mood was horrible. Even though he was biased in this competition, one of the Sun Moon Empire's team members had still lost his life. Wang Dong continued, look at the floor. It's so badly damaged. How can we continue the competition like this? Don't you think we should fix it up a little before anything else? That was true. The 3 explosive shells that had hammered into the ground had created an enormous crater that was more than 15 meters across. Metal fragments, stone, and gravel were scattered all over the place, and the competition stage seemed as wretched as it could be. The judge glanced coldly at her and said, is this the outcome you were hoping for when you brought the 3 explosive shells down to the ground? What a sly little rascal. However, you're going to be disappointed. I'm the judge for this round, and I have the authority to determine whether the competition stage should be fixed or not. You can fly, right? How will the flooring affect you? The competition is to continue. The short and stocky youth had already walked over, and he was getting closer and closer. Wang Dong could distinctly hear that his entire skeleton was crackling incessantly. Are your bones going to break? Do you want to go back and check it out first? Wang Dong said to him with a concerned look on her face. Enough nonsense. The short, stocky youth shouted angrily, you killed Xing, and I will force you to follow him into the grave. Wang Dong frowned and said, what's your name? The stocky youth glared at her and replied, my name is Zhou Xinghao. Wang Dong's large, pretty blue eyes widened as she said, is he your boyfriend or your girlfriend? Why are you so angry? You can eat anything, but you can't just say anything you want. Which eye of yours saw that I killed him? And you still want to slander me? You bastard. Zhou Xinghao wasn't as good with words as Wang Dong was, and he darted forward and was about to attack her. Wang Dong just stood there and didn't move at all. Her eyes were fixed innocently on the judge instead. The judge wanted to be biased towards the Sun Moon Empire's team, but he couldn't allow Zhou Xinghao to violate the rules and attack his opponent before the match had even begun. The judge hurriedly stepped in to block Zhou Xinghao, and he put on a serious look as he said, the round has yet to begin. I will disqualify you if you violate the rules. Go back to your places and prepare for battle. You can only attack each other once I've announced that the competition has begun. Zhou Xinghao huffed and puffed as he glared at Wang Dong. I will break you into a million pieces to avenge Xing. With that, he turned around and strode back to his spot. Wang Dong smiled at the judge. She was currently dressed like a man, but her good looks still stunned the judge momentarily as he returned her gaze. You're an honest and fair judge. She walked away slowly after her remark. The judge had recovered by now, and he almost vomited blood. What's he thinking, calling me an honest and fair judge? This fellow. Who are you? Gave Wang Dong a thumbs up from beneath the stage. Wang Dong gave him a smile in return as she put the milk bottle in her hands away and turned around to face Zhou Xinghao. Who are you? Mouth moved as he mouthed something to her. Wang Dong tilted her head to signal that she understood. With the chemistry that the two of them had, they could even communicate through soundless mouthing. The judge wasn't like before, and he waited for both parties to return to their rightful spots before he raised his right arm into air and swung it down forcefully. Zhou Xinghao didn't fly into the air like Xing had before. As the judge slung his arm down, he raised both arms into the air. A black ball of light began to light up, and a metal wheel that was more than half a meter in diameter appeared in his hands, which he tossed heavily in front of him. The metal wheel dropped to the ground with a heavy plonk and began to rotate vigorously. Ear-splitting clanging sounds could be heard, and the wheel rapidly transformed into a large and wide base. Zhou Xinghao leapt onto the base, and at least 12 spots on his body shone with the light of storage-type soul tools. This was the Soul Tool Fortress, a classic opening. However, his Soul Tool Fortress base was conspicuously bigger than that of typical forts. However, it was at this moment that Zhou Xinghao found himself in a daze. His Soul Tool Fortress was just entering its second assembly phase, and it hadn't been more than 2 seconds since he took out the wheel to toss onto the ground. But a mass of golden spheres was already crashing toward him. 2 seconds ago, Wang Dong had made her move right when the judge swung his hand down. She didn't even release her martial soul, but her entire body shot into the sky like an arrow as she rocketed towards Zhou Xinghao's position. A powerful ray of light sparkled as she dashed out, and the blinding white light propelled her forward as she rapidly accelerated to about 100 meters per second. The competition stage was only 100 meters in diameter. This also meant that 1 second was all it took for Wang Dong to reach her opponent. Wang Dong only unleashed her radiant butterfly goddess when she was about 10 meters away from Zhou Xinghao. Her dazzling wings extended to both sides, and she made use of that forceful propulsion force as she flapped down with her wings. Air resistance allowed her to soar upwards, and her entire body shot into the sky just like that. She opened her wings and was facing Zhou Xinghao as her second soul ring lit up, and her light of the butterfly goddess rained down on Zhou Xinghao like a meteor shower. It wasn't just people from the Sun Moon Empire that knew how to use soul tools. Wang Dong had a class 6 soul engineer with her, and how could Huo Yuan not help the woman he loved suit up? This was the force that a class 6 soul thruster could emit within a short period of time. Wang Dong's cultivation and physique was just enough to sustain the pressure from a soul thruster of this class. The entire process happened way too quickly. The audience could only see a flash across their eyes before 2 bluish gold wings stretched out not far from where Zhou Xinghao was, and golden meteors that seemed to eclipse the sun rained down from the sky. Zhou Xinghao's Soul Tool Fortress was still being assembled, and wasn't operational at all. He had no other choice but to open his class 5 protective soul barrier at once. He was also a class 5 soul engineer, and he was a 5-ring soul king as well. His cultivation was a little weaker than Xing's HD beam, but he was unnaturally talented, and he also possessed incredible strength. Zhou Xinghao had his own unique mastery of Soul Tool Fortresses, and he could control certain immensely powerful and dense soul tools to assemble his very own fortress. He had a nickname within the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy. He was known as Heavy Cannon. Zhou Xinghao used his protective soul barrier to defend himself against Wang Dong's assault. He gritted his teeth as he pushed his soul tools to assemble as fast as he could. However, Wang Dong didn't continue her onslaught, instead descending from the sky. She folded her wings and raised them high into the sky, before they transformed into 2 enormous guillotine-like blades that slashed down from the sky. Her luminous wings seemed to make sparks as they slashed through the air, and dazzling golden flames began to burn. Zhou Xinghao's protective soul barrier crackled and quivered amidst shrill and sharp sounds. In the next moment, Zhou Xinghao saw the same light sphere that took Xing's life erupt before him. And so, he subconsciously unleashed his own invincible barrier. The Sun Moon Empire hadn't even understood how Xing perished before Zhou Xinghao entered the arena. He didn't want to follow in his good friend's footsteps. Stupid. Wang Dong muttered with a smile on her face, and her footwork changed as she wrapped around behind him. However, she didn't launch any further attacks. Zhou Xinghao's Soul Tool Fortress was finally complete amidst a series of metal clanging sounds. At this moment, he seemed like a large metal porcupine, and more than 150 cannon barrels of various kinds protruded from his body, while he stood upon the metal base like a giant metal monster. And this was under the circumstance that stationary soul tools weren't allowed. Otherwise, the much bigger stationary soul cannons would make him look even more valiant and fearsome. Zhou Xinghao gritted his teeth, as he knew that he had been tricked. Everyone on their team had 2 invincible barriers, but soul power still needed to use 1. The user still had to use about 1% of his or her soul power even if their opponent didn't launch another attack. While the most important component that he required for his Soul Tool Fortress was soul power, Zhou Xinghao activated 1 soul ring after another generously, and he unleashed all his soul skills that amplified his soul power. At the same time, the Soul Tool Fortress began to spin on its base, and snapped around to track Wang Dong. Dozens of soul rays fired off, and swung around as if they intended to slash the entire world into pieces. However, he still couldn't see Wang Dong anywhere even after he completed a 360-degree turn. He looked up at the sky instinctively, but there was nothing in the sky. I love to beat fools. Wang Dong's voice sounded from behind him. behind him. Zhou Xinghao couldn't see, but the audience could. Wang Dongda had been behind him this entire time. Soul Tool fortresses could only cover about 180 degrees around the user, because cannons wouldn't be installed on the user's back, as the body could rotate. Wang Dongda picked up on this weakness, and she began to use Ghost Shadow Perplexing Track as the Soul Tool fort was rotating, and followed Zhou Xinghao's rotation. She wasn't too hasty to launch another attack. However, Zhou Xinghao had his invincible barrier and his class 5 protective soul barrier, so attacking her opponent would be highly inefficient at this moment. However, both of these barriers required soul power to operate. Cold sweat trickled down Zhou Xinghao's forehead. However, the fact that he could represent the Sun Moon Empire in a tournament like this meant he had some outstanding characteristics. Nobody understood how Shi Xing had died in the previous battle, and he had perished without unleashing his full potential. Zhou Xinghao didn't want to see himself in a similar situation. The Soul Tool fortress was like a metal porcupine, and a ball of silver light suddenly rose up from its position behind the nape of his neck and instantly exploded above his head. Wang Dongda could clearly see a silver wave rippling out explosively. She was still staying close to the protective barrier behind the fortress, so she was immediately repelled by an immense force. A look of astonishment flashed across her pretty face as she extended her wings to compensate for the enormous pushing power. Who are you? Frowned below the stage as he muttered to himself. A shock bomb. Is he not afraid of the force shattering his own heart? Shock bombs were a special type of soul tool. Shock bombs were meant for offensive use, and they could produce powerful shockwaves that strike at opponents within a certain range. What Zhou Xinghao did was use a shock bomb to attack both himself and Wang Dongda at the same time impartially, so that he could push Wang Dongda away from him. He intended to hurt Wang Dongda more, but he also hurt himself in the process. No, his invincible barrier hasn't completely vanished yet. Who are you? Immediately recovered after his momentary surprise. Zhou Xinghao used his own invincible barrier to withstand the shock bomb's effects, and even though he had to consume soul power in the process, this was better than the shock bomb taking effect on his own body. Furthermore, he finally took the opportunity to spin around. The several hundred cannon barrels on and around him fled blindingly the moment Wang Dongda appeared in his field of view. At this point, he was no longer just a porcupine. He had turned into a terrifying metal blender. All kinds of soul rays and soul cannon shells, explosive shells, incendiary shells, paralysis rays, freezing rays, shock bombs, decomposition shells, rupturing bombs, and various other frightening attacks covered an area of 20 meters around Wang Dongda. This metal hurricane that erupted so suddenly seemed to symbolize Zhou Xinghao emotions. His expression looked savage and ferocious, and his eyes were bloodshot with rage and fury. His eyes were as wide as they could be, and he wanted to watch his metal hurricane tear Wang Dongda's body to pieces. They were so close together, and defense wasn't Wang Dongda's forte either. This was everything that he had, and it would be extremely difficult for her to escape if she found herself locked in by this all-out assault. Meng Hengchen covered her mouth beneath the competition stage. Several people from the Tang Sect camp stood up with nervous looks on their faces. Hu Yuao had just used his necromancer's silent heart, so his face was still as cold as before. His brain was still calculating at top speed. Right in the moment that her opponent erupted, Wang Dongda still felt goosebumps all over her body even though she was prepared. He lived up to the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy's name after all, and their soul tools were very formidable. However, right when that metal hurricane was about to rip her to pieces, she vanished into thin air. Yes, she disappeared without any warning at all. Clang. A powerful force appeared behind his back, and a sharp aura of light forced its way into the soul fort and poured inside. The entire cannon base began to shake with this attack. How can it be? How can this be instant shift? At this moment, Zhou Xinghao was facing his team's waiting area, staring at Xiao Hingchen with a doubtful look in his eyes. They didn't have to talk about Wang Dongda's fifth soul skill, the one that she used to defeat Shi Xing. The instant shift that she had just used was clearly not something that she released with her soul rings. How could she possess a skill like that? Xiao Hingchen's eyes froze as well. Who would have thought that Wang Dongda had a trump card like that in a time as crucial as this? Wang Dongda's dazzling bluish golden wings slashed ferociously at his soul tool fortress. Zhou Xinghao no longer had his invincible barrier, and no matter how tough the fort's metal was, it couldn't be compared to a Soul Emperor's attack. Two deep gashes appeared behind the Soul Tool fort. Zhou Xinghao spun around hysterically, but Wang Dongda kept herself close to him and used the Ghost Shadow Perplexing Track as she followed his rotation. Her wings resembled two heavy blades as they lashed out again and again. Metal fragments broke apart and flowed out continuously, and Soul Tool after Mighty Soul Tool was rapidly being damaged. Zhou Xinghao wanted to use his remaining invincible barrier along with another shock bomb to find yet another opportunity. However, Wang Dongda's use of her instant shift made sure that he couldn't even muster any self-confidence at all. What difference will it make if I pull the same trick again? She can just use instant shift to evade everything. Zhou Xinghao understood that the key to his defeat was allowing Wang Dongda to come near him. Her instant shift also had a range limit, and his Soul Tool fortress wasn't suited for an opponent like her at all. Enough. At this moment, a loud shout tore through the air, and a layer of silver light pushed Wang Dongda away. The judge stood in front of Zhou Xinghao like a hen that was trying to protect her chicks. What are you doing? Wang Dongda exclaimed angrily with a cold look in her eyes. She was already preparing for a killing blow. The Soul Tool fortress was already cracked and breaking apart, and Zhou Xinghao was about to perish at her hands at any moment. The judge lowered his voice and said, he doesn't have the ability to fight back anymore. I'm the judge, and I rule that the Tang Sect is victorious in this round. I have the authority to stop the competition if one party is no longer able to fight back. Wang Dongda gradually calmed down. She grunted dispassionately as she gripped her milk bottle and walked back to the center of the arena. I haven't lost yet. Go to hell. Zhou Xinghao roared hysterically, and he arched his body backwards and revealed 8 shining silver cannon mouths on his chest. 8 silver rays immediately fired off toward Wang Dongda with lightning speed in the next moment. Wang Dongda had her back to him, and she had not expected that Zhou Xinghao would launch another attack against her, and the judge had already ruled this round as her win. Furthermore, the judge did nothing to stop him. The truth was that this wasn't because the judge was biased towards Zhou Xinghao. He also didn't expect Zhou Xinghao to continue attacking after his ruling. However, he did feel an intense excitement and delight when those 8 silver rays flew toward Wang Dongda. Watch out! Hu Yuao's icy voice suddenly rang out in Wang Dongda's mind. Wang Dongda always trusted Hu Yuao's words. Furthermore, she could also hear Zhou Xinghao's hysterical voice behind her. She lunged forward towards the ground, and her fifth soul ring lit up once more as intense golden light immediately covered her entire body. Pop, pop, pop. Even though Wang Dongda's evasion was quick, the soul rays were traveling at breakneck speed, and 3 rays still hit her back. Wang Dongda grunted from the pain as she stumbled a few steps forward from the force. Even though she had the Goddess of Light's possession, 3 holes still appeared on her back, and she felt as if there was some terrifying force that was rapidly causing her body to break apart. If she hadn't used her Goddess of Light's possession in time to defend herself, the rays would have tunneled right through her body. Bastard. Several people from the Tang Sect leapt onto the competition stage in an instant. However, their movements couldn't compare to how quick another beam of light was. That light had a radiant golden color and was tinged with deep purple hues. This beam seemed material, as if it could pierce through even time and space. The competition stage's protective dome had receded the moment the judge declared that Wang Dongda was victorious in this round, so there was nothing blocking this beam. Right when Wang Dongda was lunging forward to lie flat on the ground, the purplish golden light that seemed to tunnel through reality and eternity arrived before Zhou Xinghao. Zhou Xinghao howled and released his invincible barrier once more. He was excited at this moment. The silver rays that he had just used were forceful decomposition rays, and they possessed a special characteristic of breaking apart all kinds of matter. These rays were considered one of the most destructive soul rays. He could imagine Wang Dongda's body breaking apart and drawing her last breath from the decomposition. The moment he saw that purplish golden light appear, he felt as if his spirit was leaving his body, and he used his second invincible barrier that he carried around without any hesitation. He deeply believed that whatever his opponent unleashed couldn't do anything to him with his invincible barrier around him, no matter what it was. However, a sinister scene appeared on the competition stage the moment that purplish golden light struck Zhou Xinghao's invincible barrier. The people from the Tang Sect, along with the Sun Moon Empire's team who were also rushing onto stage, and everything else that was moving seemed to freeze in that moment, as if time itself seemed to freeze. A ray of golden light descended from the sky in the next moment and slammed brutally into Zhou Xinghao's invincible barrier. That golden ray disregarded his invincible barrier entirely, and it pierced right through at the moment it struck and landed directly onto Zhou Xinghao's body. A golden light projection that resembled a skeleton immediately flickered above Zhou Xinghao's body, and his entire body seemed to freeze and go slack. The purplish golden beam drilled right through him, and Zhou Xinghao's invincible barrier broke apart in an instant. Boom. Zhou Xinghao's body was still inside his broken and tattered soul fortress, and he resembled a bursting balloon as his entire frame exploded violently, starting from his head. Flesh and blood flew in all directions in that moment, and his damaged protective soul barrier was also blown into smithereens. Zhou Xinghao transformed into a tornado of flesh and metal that whirled all over the place. Time returned to normal, and the scene that everyone saw was this horrifying sight. Astonished gasps resonated through the entire place. Jing Hingchen's face was black as he stood up on the rostrum, and the petrifying atmosphere that resulted from the explosion that had occurred on stage caused even the Sun Moon Empire's team to pause as they dashed onto the stage. Even Xiao Hingchen's footsteps halted momentarily. Xiao Hingchen's eyes immediately found a person that was sitting down on the other side. That person was Hua Yuao, who was still sitting in his wheelchair in the waiting area, and hadn't climbed onto the competition stage. A purplish golden vertical eye that didn't seem like it had any life at all was gradually closing up on his forehead. Xiao Hingchen felt a little dizzy even though this vertical eye was in the process of closing up. 100 meters. This attack was launched from 100 meters away, and Zhou Xinghao also had his invincible barrier to protect him. Despite all that, this strike broke through his invincible barrier. What kind of power was required to achieve something like that? The Sun Moon Empire team was about to go crazy after their temporary astonishment. All kinds of soul tools were unleashed one after another in that instant as soul rings sparkled alternately. A chaotic brawl was about to occur. The Tang Sect team also began to move. Shu Sanqi's face was dark and solemn as he stood at the very front, protecting Wang Dongga behind him. Hikaiju was right next to him, and he unleashed an enormous soul tool fortress just like that from nothing at all. His Juga divine crossbow cannon's 16 cannon mouths condensed light, and one large cannon shell after another protruded from the cannon barrels as a terrifying aura permeated the skies. These cannons felt as if they could go off at any moment. Xiao Xiao, Zhang Nanan, and Nana were standing beside them, and they released their martial souls at the same time. Stop. A deafening exclamation rang out, and a human figure descended from the sky in the next moment. This person was an elderly man clad in a long green robe, and he landed right next to the judge. This person raised his hand, and a green light screen rose several hundred meters into the sky. This light screen forcibly separated the two opposing parties, and even the pressure that they released was separated. Everyone from the Tang Sect camp grew stern, and this was especially true for Hikaiju. He was a soul engineer, and he naturally knew what ability the old man before him had just used. That was probably a class 9 soul tool, and even a titled Douluo would have trouble breaking through a defensive barrier of that level. The old man turned around and knocked the judge off stage with one slap, and the judge was dashed to the ground beneath the stage just like that. Stop, everyone. Calm yourselves. My name is Zhang Zan, and I'm this tournament's chief judge. Whoever dares to make another move will be immediately disqualified from the tournament. The corner of Xiao Hingchen's mouth twitched. He naturally recognized Zhang Zan. He was a powerful class 9 soul engineer, but this man didn't have a good relationship with his grandfather, and was instead an important figure from the Empire's Hall of Consecration. This man was as close as one could be to Xiao Hingchen's grandfather in terms of cultivation, even if he didn't actually have the same rank, and he was especially adept with defensive soul tools. Zhang Zan was known as the Unbreakable King, and his title was Unbreakable. The Unbreakable Douluo, Zhang Zan. Xiao Hingchen raised his hand, and the Sun Moon Empire team reluctantly and grudgingly withdrew their respective soul tools. Their eyes looked like they were spitting fire. The Tang Sect camp didn't do much, as Zhang Nanan helped Wang Dongga up and whispered, "How are you feeling, Dongga?" Wang Dongga forced a smile and said, "I'm alright. It's just a little painful. It would be strange if she didn't feel in pain after being struck by those decomposition rays, and 3 black spots could be seen on her back. If she didn't have her Goddess of Light's possession that greatly weakened the force of those class 6 decomposition rays, she would probably have been heinously injured by now. Even so, she had still consumed more than 30% of her soul power before she managed to stabilize her wounds, making sure her bones, ligaments, and her organs weren't damaged. However, she was a top-tier beauty, and skin damage would infuriate her even more than if her bones and her organs were damaged. We need an explanation, Chief Judge Zhang." A cold voice rang out from behind the Tang Sect people. Ji Juigan was pushing Hua Yuao's wheelchair, and Jing Zian and Nan Qipai stood guard beside them as they walked onto the competition stage. The Tang Sect company parted to create a path so that Hua Yuao could come all the way out in front. His eyes were so cold at this point that they seemed like they could freeze through everything. Hua Yuao stared quietly at Zhang Zan, who was a titled Douluo and also a class 9 soul engineer, and his aura seemed to match even Zhang Zan's. Zhang Zan said in a deep voice, "I've seen everything that just happened. This happened because of the judge, and I will immediately relieve him of his duty. I will personally oversee this round until the end." "That's not what I'm talking about." Hua Yuao shook his head. Zhang Zan focused his eyes. It had been many years since someone dared to speak to him like that. Strangely, he wasn't angry at all as he lowered his voice and said, "Zhou Xinghao attacked Wang Dong after the outcome of this round has been ruled, and he brought his own death upon himself. However, he has already paid for it with his life. This issue is considered resolved. As the chief judge, I will give Wang Dong 15 minutes to rest before the competition will continue." Hua Yuao stared at Zhang Zan deeply before his eyes turned towards Xiao Hingchen in the distance, but he said nothing. However, his gaze was like a sharp knife. Zhang Zan thought about the incomprehensible and unfathomable purplish gold beam that just appeared, and even he felt a little numb from Hua Yuao's piercing stare. "Let's go back." Hua Yuao spoke plainly, and he didn't push the issue any further. They were inside the Sun Moon Empire, and he wouldn't have gotten a better explanation or ruling even if this competition wasn't in the Sun Moon Empire. Everything could only be resolved on stage. Ji Juigan continued pushing Hua Yuao's wheelchair as they returned to their waiting area. Hua Yuao glanced at Wang Dongga quietly as he passed by, and he reached out and grasped her hand. However, his expression was still as cold as before. Wang Dongga glanced back at him discreetly. She thought to herself, thankfully, he used that ability that allows him to keep calm and composed. Otherwise. She couldn't even imagine what would have happened. Inside the resting lounge, Wang Qiu's eyes sparkled as she silently stared at Hua Yuao. Her eyes seemed to glow with something, and her right hand unwittingly gripped her chair's armrest. Only she could feel that the beam that was fired from Hua Yuao's eye of destiny carried a certain crazy sense of exhaustion, and even she felt a little dazed at that moment. She didn't know if she could take an attack like that achieving the target. If Hua Yuao was a dragon, then Wang Dongga was his reverse scale. Wang Dongga immediately retrieved her milk bottle to replenish her soul power when she returned to the waiting area. Hua Yuao grasped her hand tighter, and Haodong power immediately began to circulate through the most important parts of Wang Dongga's body. Hua Yuao lowered his voice and said, "The next battle is up to you now, second senior brother." Wang Dongga opened her eyes forcefully. I can keep going." Hua Yuao shot a cold look at her and said, "Shut up. You were careless before your adversary, and you went on guard against an enemy that still had the ability to fight. Won't you be sending yourself to your own death if you go again? I've said this before, there can only be one voice in this team. I'm the leader, and you must listen to my orders." Wang Dongga pouted, and tears started welling up in her eyes. Hua Yuao had never spoken to her with that tone and attitude. That was just so annoying. Hikaiju chortled and said, "Don't worry, Dongga. Let your second senior brother handle this. I will make their heads pop one after another." Wang Dongga nodded softly. Even though she was a little displeased with Hua Yuao's attitude, he was still her man after all, and this wasn't the time for her to throw a tantrum. That would undoubtedly affect the influence and command that her boyfriend had as team leader. The 15 minutes of rest were soon over, and Wang Dongga didn't continue on with the battles. The Sun Moon Empire's next participant that stepped onto the competition stage was a little shocked. Zhang Zan had been standing at the stage as since the moment he arrived. He looked at Hikaiju and said, "If you switch, it means that Wang Dong has admitted defeat." "Yes." Hikaiju walked up to the center of the stage and stared at Zhang Zan as he nodded in acknowledgement. Xiao Hingchen almost went insane beneath the competition stage. The person that he had just sent up was meant to counter Wang Dongga's fighting style, but the Tang Sect switched someone else up. From his perspective, the Tang Sect wanted to conserve strength so that Wang Dongga could come back in the group battle. Nobody from his side knew much about Wang Dongga's wounds, but the fact that she was still sitting beside Hua Yuao meant that her wounds couldn't be that severe. Cunning. That's just too cunning. Hua Yuao's arrangement was intended to break up his opponent's rhythm and momentum anyway, and it wasn't just because he was upset about Wang Dongga's carelessness before her adversary. Zhang Zan lowered his voice and said, "Report your names. Hikaiju, Tang Sect, Xiao Ping, Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy." Zhang Zan continued Zhang Zan continued, return to your places, and prepare for the fight. Both of you must listen to my orders during the contest, and I have the authority to punish you accordingly if either one of you decides to continue attacking after I announce this round's ruling. Nobody dared to disregard and underestimate a Class 9 Soul Engineer's threats. K2 and Xiaoping nodded before they returned to their respective sides. This was the single elimination round's third match. More accurately put, this was the fourth match, because Wang Donga gave one up. The current score was 2 versus 1 in favor of the Tang Sect. Furthermore, the Tang Sect had ensured their entry into the group battle because of the 2 points that they had secured. K2 turned around and stared into the distance as he reached the edge of the competition stage. He took a step forward with his left leg, and he took a stance as if he were going to charge forward. Xiaoping's eyes were as sharp and focused as ever on the other side. He was like a cheetah that was winding up. Zhang Zan looked at both parties as he raised his right arm high into the air before he swung it down to signal that the match had begun. Xiaoping's soul thrusters behind his back glowed the moment Zhang Zan swung his hand down, and he blasted towards K2 just like Wang Donga got close to Zhou Hao. Yes, he was a close combat soul engineer, and Xiao Hingchen had initially meant for him to meet Wang Donga head-on. A long spear appeared in Xiaoping's hands as he dashed forward. There were 2 sharp points on his spear, and they began to shine with intense light as he moved forward. 3 soul rings lit up one after another, greatly boosting his soul power. K2 was in a sprinting stance, and he also began to move when his opponent did. Of course, he wouldn't use his soul tool fortress and end up at a disadvantage like Zhou Hao did. K2 raised his right hand, and a soul cannon immediately appeared on his right arm. A silver sphere was fired and exploded less than 20 meters out, transforming into a silver web that enveloped Xiaoping flying toward him. Xiaoping's eyes were overflowing with the desire to draw blood, but he still managed to retain his composure amidst all the bloodlust. A white light erupted from his chest, and his forward-moving body abruptly came to a halt as flourishing soul power undulations rippled from his body. He propelled himself backwards right as armor covered his entire body with a clang. This tiny forward and backward movement couldn't be disregarded. Xiaoping had forced himself backwards when he was charging forward at lightning speed. The reactive impact wasn't something that normal people could withstand. Yet, it was this reverse propulsion force that gave him a chance to avoid that enormous silver web from trapping him at the last moment. The light web closed up, and Xiaoping was about to charge forward once more when a violent and shocking explosion erupted. Silver-white shockwaves detonated from where the light web had closed, and forced Xiaoping to pause as he was getting ready to renew his charge. Xiaoping's body unwillingly stopped for an instant. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.